The Atlantic Ocean was unusually calm on the morning of May 14, 1607, after more than 4 months at sea. 3 English ships, the Susan Constant, Godspeed, and Discovery, slowly entered a quiet river along the eastern coast of North America. The men aboard had survived violent storms, hunger, disease, and uncertainty. They believed they were about to build England's future. They had no idea. They were also creating the beginning of what would eventually become the United States. This settlement would be called Jamestown. More than 400 years later, historians still search through fragile documents, faded signatures, and forgotten records to answer one fascinating question. Do some American families today still carry the surnames of Jamestown's first settlers? The answer is yes. Some of those names have survived wars, epidemics, migrations, and centuries of history. But each surname tells a much bigger story. Not every family became wealthy. Not every colonist survived. Many disappeared without leaving descendants. Others unknowingly helped shape the future of America. Today, we're uncovering 20 last names connected to the first permanent English colony in North America. These aren't myths. They're names preserved inside passenger lists, land grants, colonial records, church registers, and archaeological discoveries. And the first name on that list belongs to one of the most recognizable figures in American history. John Smith. Very few names are more famous than Smith. Captain John Smith arrived at Jamestown in 1607 after an adventurous life that had already taken him across Europe and the Ottoman frontier. According to colonial records, Smith quickly became one of the colony's strongest leaders. While many settlers searched obsessively for gold, Smith focused on survival. He organized food supplies. He strengthened defenses. He forced settlers to work. His famous rule became, "He that will not work shall not eat." Without those strict measures, historians believe Jamestown may have disappeared during its very first year. Smith also developed relationships with nearby Powhatan communities. Although those relationships were often tense and complicated, they became essential for the colony's survival. The surname Smith would eventually become one of the most common names in America, but its connection to Jamestown gives it an even deeper historical meaning. Bartholomew Gosnold, the second surname, is Gosnold. Unlike Smith, Bartholomew Gosnold rarely receives equal attention despite playing an enormous role. In fact, many historians consider him one of Jamestown's true founders. Gosnold helped organize the Virginia Company's expedition before the ships even left England. He encouraged wealthy investors. He recruited settlers. He supported choosing the settlement site. Unfortunately, only months after arriving, disease struck. Gosnold died during the colony's first difficult summer. He never witnessed Jamestown's future success. Archaeologists believe his remains may have been identified during excavations at historic Jamestown, making him one of the earliest English colonists whose burial has possibly been confirmed through archaeology. Edward Maria Wingfield. Another remarkable surname is Wingfield. Edward Maria Wingfield became Jamestown's very first president. His position resembled that of a colony governor. But leadership inside Jamestown quickly became political. Arguments developed over food, exploration, military decisions, and personal rivalries. Wingfield eventually lost power after only a few months. His removal demonstrated something historians often overlook. Jamestown wasn't united. It was divided from the beginning. Many of its leaders constantly struggled for influence, while the colony itself fought simply to survive. Percy. The surname Percy entered Jamestown through George Percy, a member of one of England's most powerful noble families. Unlike many settlers seeking fortune, Percy already came from privilege. Yet even wealth offered little protection. George Percy suffered disease, witnessed starvation, and survived attacks that killed many others. Later, he became acting governor. His journals remain among the most valuable first-hand descriptions of early Jamestown. They reveal exhaustion, fear, political conflict, and the harsh realities hidden behind England's dream of empire. Newport. Next comes the surname Newport. Captain Christopher Newport commanded the flagship Susan Constant. Without him, Jamestown might never have been reached. Newport completed multiple dangerous Atlantic crossings. Each voyage brought desperately needed food, tools, livestock, and additional settlers. Although disagreements sometimes emerged between Newport and John Smith, historians credit both men with keeping the colony alive during its earliest years. Christopher Newport represents the forgotten sailors whose navigation skills connected England to its fragile colony across the ocean. As Jamestown struggled through its first years, survival depended on more than famous leaders. Behind every captain and governor stood ordinary settlers whose names quietly became part of American history. Some were craftsmen, some were soldiers. Some were farmers, others never expected to become pioneers at all, yet their surnames still appear in colonial records more than 4 centuries later. The next name belongs to one of Jamestown's earliest gentlemen. Ratcliffe. Captain John Ratcliffe was among the original settlers who arrived in 1607. At first, he served as one of the colony's council members and later became president after Edward Maria Wingfield lost office. But Ratcliffe's leadership came during one of Jamestown's most difficult periods. Food shortages became worse, relations with native communities deteriorated, tenal disagreements divided the colony. Eventually, Ratcliffe led a trading expedition hoping to obtain corn from the Powhatan Confederacy. Instead, the mission ended in tragedy. Historical accounts describe that he was captured and killed during negotiations. His death became another reminder that Jamestown's survival remained uncertain every single season. Today, the surname Ratcliffe still appears throughout the United States, carrying a connection to one of the colony's earliest leaders. Archer. The surname Archer traces back to Gabriel Archer, another original passenger. Unlike John Smith, Archer frequently challenged the colony's leadership. Letters and official reports suggest he became involved in political rivalries that divided Jamestown's governing council. Despite those conflicts, Archer remained an important figure during the colony's first years. Modern archaeology made his story even more remarkable. In 2003, archaeologists working at historic Jamestown uncovered a carefully buried skeleton believed to belong to Gabriel Archer. The grave contained unusual artifacts, including a ceremonial staff, suggesting Archer held significant status within the colony. More than 400 years after his death, science helped reconnect his surname with Jamestown's earliest history. Martin. Another familiar American surname is Martin. Captain John Martin served as one of the Virginia Company's original council members. Martin often disagreed with other leaders about trade, military strategy, and supplies. His outspoken personality created frequent tension. Even so, he survived the dangerous first years while many others did not. Historical land grants later show that Martin received extensive property in Virginia. His descendants and associated families became part of the colony's expanding population. Today, Martin remains one of America's most recognizable surnames, with roots stretching back to Jamestown's earliest records. Kendall. One of the less famous names is Kendall. George Kendall arrived aboard the first expedition and initially served on the governing council. However, Jamestown's political struggles quickly turned deadly. Kendall was accused of conspiracy against the colony's leadership. After a council investigation, he became the first person executed in English America for alleged espionage and mutiny. Whether those accusations were completely justified remains debated by historians. But Kendall's story demonstrates how fragile trust became inside the isolated settlement. The colony faced danger, not only from disease and starvation, but also from fear, suspicion, and political conflict. Not every important settler carried a weapon. Some carried faith. The surname Hunt belongs to Reverend Robert Hunt, Jamestown's first Anglican minister. Before a church building even existed, Hunt gathered settlers beneath a canvas shelter for prayer. Historical writings describe him as a calming influence during periods of disagreement, while political leaders argued Hunt encouraged unity. His presence helped establish organized religious life in England's first permanent American colony. Although he died only months after Jamestown's founding, his role shaped the colony's spiritual foundation. Centuries later, churches across Virginia still recognize Reverend Hunt as one of America's earliest Protestant ministers. By the end of Jamestown's second year, hope still remained uncertain. Disease continued spreading, food remained scarce. Many settlers questioned whether England should abandon the colony entirely, yet more ships kept arriving, more families crossed the Atlantic, and more surnames slowly became woven into American history. By the winter of 1609, Jamestown faced a disaster unlike anything the settlers had imagined. Food supplies had nearly disappeared. Trade with nearby Powhatan communities had broken down. The James River froze. Horses, dogs, rats, snakes, even leather belts and shoe soles were reportedly eaten in desperate attempts to survive. Historians now refer to this horrific period as the starving time. Out of nearly 300 colonists, only about 60 survived by the spring of 1610. Archaeological discoveries at historic Jamestown have even uncovered evidence supporting written accounts of extreme starvation. The colony stood only days away from complete abandonment. Yet from this tragedy emerged several surnames that would continue through American history. Yeardley, one of the most important names, is Yeardley. Sir George Yeardley arrived in Virginia during the colony's difficult years, and later became governor. Unlike many earlier leaders, Yeardley believed Jamestown needed stability instead of constant military control. In 1619, he introduced one of the most significant political developments in American history. He approved the creation of the House of Burgesses. This became the first representative legislative assembly in English North America. For the first time, elected representatives from different settlements gathered to discuss local laws. Many historians consider this event an early foundation of representative government in what would later become the United States. The surname Yeardley therefore carries a connection not only to Jamestown, but also to the origins of American democracy. Rolfe's surnames changed Virginia's future more than Rolfe. John Rolfe arrived after surviving the devastating shipwreck of the Sea Venture near Bermuda. Unlike soldiers searching for gold, Rolfe focused on agriculture. He experimented with a sweeter variety of tobacco imported from the Caribbean. His crop proved enormously successful in European markets. Almost overnight, tobacco transformed Virginia's economy. Land values increased. New settlers arrived. Private farms expanded along the James River. Jamestown finally possessed something it had lacked since 1607, a profitable export. John Rolfe's name also became famous for another reason. In 1614, he married Pocahontas, the daughter of Powhatan. The marriage created several years of relative peace between English settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy. Although often romanticized, historians view the marriage as both a personal relationship and a political alliance during a fragile period in colonial history. Today, the surname Rolfe remains permanently linked to one of Virginia's greatest turning points. Pierce, another important surname, is Pierce. Captain William Pierce became one of Jamestown's experienced military officers and sea captains. He completed multiple voyages between England and Virginia, transporting settlers and supplies. Pierce also owned land and participated in the colony's growing tobacco economy. Historical records show his household became one of the better established families during Jamestown's expansion. Unlike many early settlers who disappeared from history, the Pierce family successfully adapted to Virginia's changing society. Spelman, the surname Spelman, belongs to Henry Spelman, one of Jamestown's most fascinating young settlers. Arriving as a teenager, Spelman spent considerable time living among Powhatan communities. He learned their language, he observed their customs. He became one of the colony's earliest interpreters. His writings provide historians with rare descriptions of Native American life during the early 17th century. Without Henry Spelman's observations, much of what scholars know about Powhatan society might have been lost forever. His surname reminds us that Jamestown's history was shaped not only by conflict, but also by cultural exchange. Argall, the next surname is Argall. Sir Samuel Argall served as governor and naval commander during Virginia's turbulent years. Argall was known for his aggressive leadership. He expanded English influence throughout the Chesapeake region and strengthened military defenses. However, his methods often attracted criticism. Some colonists accused him of using excessive authority and enriching himself through trade. Despite the controversy, Argall played a major role in protecting England's growing colony during a period of international competition. His career reflects the difficult balance between leadership, ambition, and survival in early America. By the early 1620s, Jamestown looked completely different from the struggling settlement founded in 1607. Wooden homes replaced temporary shelters. Private farms stretched along the river. Ships arrived regularly carrying new settlers. Families, not just adventurers, began crossing the Atlantic, but just as the colony finally seemed secure, another catastrophe struck. A coordinated attack would change Virginia forever and force every surviving family to reconsider its future. By 1622, Jamestown had survived famine, disease, political conflict, and years of uncertainty. The colony had grown from a fragile military outpost into a network of farms and settlements, stretching along the James River. Thousands of English settlers had arrived. Tobacco exports were increasing every year. For the first time, Virginia appeared stable, but beneath the surface, tensions with the Powhatan Confederacy continued to grow. On the morning of March 22, 1622, coordinated attacks were launched against English settlements throughout Virginia. More than 300 colonists were killed in a single day. Nearly one-fourth of the English population in Virginia lost their lives. Jamestown itself survived only because an indigenous boy living with an English family secretly warned the settlement before the attack began. The colony had escaped destruction once again, and several of the remaining surnames became part of Virginia's rebuilding effort. West, the surname West, is connected to Thomas West, better known as Lord de la Warr. Although he spent only limited time in Virginia, his arrival in 1610 completely changed Jamestown's fate. When he reached the colony, the surviving settlers had already abandoned Jamestown and were sailing back toward England. De la Warr intercepted them on the James River. He ordered every ship to turn around. Instead of leaving Virginia forever, the settlers returned and rebuilt the colony. Without that decision, Jamestown would likely have disappeared from history. Today, the American state of Delaware is named after Lord de la Warr, making his surname one of the most recognizable legacies of early colonial America. Dale, another important surname, is Dale. Sir Thomas Dale became governor during one of Jamestown's most difficult rebuilding periods. Dale believed discipline was essential for survival. He introduced strict military laws that became known as the laws divine, moral, and martial. Many punishments were severe. Modern historians often criticize these rules for their harshness. Yet others argue they helped prevent total collapse during the colony's weakest years. Dale also founded new settlements upriver and encouraged private farming instead of communal labor. Those reforms increased food production and helped transform Virginia into a more permanent colony. The surname Dale, therefore, represents one of the major administrative turning points in Jamestown's history. Haymore, the surname Haymore, belongs to Ralph Haymore. Although not as famous as John Smith or John Rolfe, Haymore left behind one of the most valuable written accounts of early Virginia. His book documented relations between English settlers and the Powhatan Confederacy, including the events surrounding the marriage of John Rolfe and Pocahontas. For historians today, Haymore's writings provide first-hand descriptions that help reconstruct Jamestown's daily life. Without authors like Ralph Haymore, much of the colony's history would have been lost forever. Strachey, another fascinating surname, is Strachey. William Strachey traveled to Virginia after surviving the famous Sea Venture shipwreck in 1609. During that voyage, a violent hurricane stranded more than 150 passengers on Bermuda. The survivors eventually built 2 new ships and continued to Jamestown. Strachey carefully recorded everything he witnessed. His dramatic account of the storm is believed by many literary scholars to have inspired William Shakespeare's play, The Tempest. Whether directly or indirectly, the Jamestown story may have influenced one of history's greatest works of literature. The surname Strachey therefore connects American colonial history with English literature in a remarkable way. Pace, the final surname, is Pace. Richard Pace became known for one extraordinary moment during the Powhatan attack of 1622. According to colonial records, an indigenous youth named Shanko, who lived in Pace's household, secretly warned him that attacks were about to begin. Richard Pace immediately rowed across the James River to alert Jamestown. His warning allowed the settlement to prepare its defenses before the attackers arrived. Historians believe this quick action helped save hundreds of lives. Without that warning, Jamestown might have suffered the same devastating losses as many surrounding plantations. The surname Pace therefore represents one of the colony's greatest acts of courage and quick thinking. The legacy of Jamestown. More than 4 centuries have passed since 3 small English ships first anchored along the James River. Most of the wooden buildings have vanished. The original fort disappeared beneath layers of soil. Many of the settlers' graves remained hidden until archaeologists uncovered them centuries later. Yet their surnames continue to survive. Some remain extremely common across the United States. Others are rare but still appear in family trees, church registers, military records, and historical archives. Modern DNA genealogy has also allowed thousands of Americans to trace family connections back to Virginia's earliest colonists. Researchers continue comparing historical documents with genetic evidence, revealing new details about the families who helped establish England's first permanent settlement in North America. Jamestown was never simply a story of exploration. It was a story of survival. Disease claimed hundreds of lives. Famine nearly erased the colony. Political rivalries divided its leaders. Conflicts with native nations shaped every stage of its development. And yet, against overwhelming odds, the settlement endured. Those 20 surnames represent far more than names written on faded parchment. They belong to people who crossed an unknown ocean, faced impossible conditions, and unknowingly became part of the foundation of American history. Every old document, every weathered gravestone, every archaeological discovery, and every surviving family record brings historians one step closer to understanding the real people behind the birth of English America. Perhaps one of these surnames still exists in your own family tree. And if it does, your family's story may have begun on the shores of Jamestown more than 400 years ago.